thanks for joining us, everyone. So this webinar is going to be about the basics of Navisworks timelining. So it's just going to take us through, take you through just a bit of the outline and a bit of the basics to get you started on setting up a Navisworks model with a timeline so that you can simulate the construction. All right, so I'm just going to just a quick introduction just to introduce you guys to who we are, A2K Technologies, in case some of you are not exactly sure what we do and what we offer. A2K is a leading industry-leading solutions training consulting and management firm. So we specialise in the design technology space. So hopefully that's where you guys are at, and I'm sure that you are, because otherwise you wouldn't be interested in this topic. So that's the space that we support. We're an Autodesk Platinum partner for training and support, and we've got highly knowledgeable industry experts across the country, across Australia, that can help you with all of your projects and issues. And some of the suite here of some of the products that we support and that we provide, that we sell, are on the screen at the moment. One of the ones there to note is Adobe as well as us being an Autodesk reseller and an Autodesk product suite support company. We've also got access to support and to help with Adobe products as well. So, but you can see some of the other examples of suites that we provide there as well. Tools for Revit is another good product there, and Idea BIM Link, things like that, add-ons to programs like add-ons for Revit that can help you to be more productive, I guess. Okay. All right. Just a quick note here with regards to the breadth and the depth of our offering. So this slide basically just tells you what we do. We obviously provide the software, but we also have consulting where we can do integrated and customized solutions. We can also help and assist you with BIM and knowledge management, things like that. And then also, obviously, we conduct training sessions both in our offices, classroom-based training, or we can come to you. And for all of the product suite, basically, we can provide training, and we do provide training courses for. That's just a bit of an idea of where we sit. So we have the largest team of resources than any other Autodesk channel partner across Australia and New Zealand. So that means we're pretty well placed and pretty well resourced to help you out. Okay. Apologies about that message that's popping up. I'm not sure why that is. We'll try and get that under control. Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name's Brendan Upton. So I'm a technical consultant here at A2K, and my background is both in CAD and BIM management and Revit management, both in the MEP and the architectural world. I've worked in the industry. I've worked in the MEP industry predominantly on BIM management, but I've obviously been involved with actually design work as well. So I've got a pretty well-rounded knowledge of the construction space and MEP and architectural and construction space. And my position at A2K Technologies is predominantly Revit MEP training and support. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into the demonstration now. So we're going to jump into the program itself, into Navisworks, and we're just going to take you through the basics of the timeline there. Okay. So on the screen now, you should be able to see I've got the Navisworks program open. Okay. So I've got an example of just a pretty basic building for this exercise. I'm going to keep this presentation fairly fairly basic. I do plan, or we do plan to do a bit more of an in-depth presentation in the near future on timelining, where we can sort of go a bit further. But today, the purpose of today is to just introduce you to some of the tools, how you can actually get the timeline up and running, how you can link external programs in, and how you can manipulate your model and start adding tasks to your geometry to actually simulate a construction timeline. Okay, so this model that I've got here is a pretty basic example, but it's a good way to just show you guys and take you through a bit of the tools of how you can set up a timeline. Now this is a NWF file, a Navisworks native file. It's probably just worth noting quickly that to let you know that if you don't know already, you can obviously import into Navisworks models and geometry from many different file formats, such as AutoCAD, I should say, Revit, and so on and so forth. So you can, from those programs, you can now in Navisworks 14, you can bring them in natively, bring Revit in files in natively, or you can export them from those respective programs to a Navisworks file, like an NWC file, and then import it into Navisworks. I would just say, just on that, if you are using Revit files, Revit models, and you want to bring them into Navisworks, I would recommend, even though that now you can bring in a native Revit RVT file, I think it's better to still export your Revit model to an NWC file, then bring it into Navisworks that way. The reason I say that is because if you see on the left hand of my screen here, this selection tree window, when you export from Revit to an NWC file, you get a whole lot more flexibility with the selection tree, how it breaks up the components and the geometry of your model. You just have a whole lot more control, and then you're able to more easily make selection sets, which we're going to have a look at in a second. But you'll more easily be able to create selection sets and things like that, and just manipulate your model. So just something to keep in mind, that yes, although it's convenient that you can bring the model now straight into Revit, I think it can sometimes be of benefit to still export to that NWC format, then bring it in. Okay, all right. So this file we've got here, I've got the timeliner window open down the bottom of the screen here at the moment. That can be accessed from the Home tab. You can turn that on and off by clicking on the timeliner button here up on the ribbon. If I just click on that, it obviously turns it off and turns it back on again. Okay, so that's where you can access the actual timeliner tool itself, and that will open up this window down the bottom. I've docked it on the bottom of my screen here, so you can see the different components of the timeliner tool. Okay, so let's just run through a bit of a quick summary of the different tabs here, the different tools, and then we'll work through actually building up a project and actually putting some tasks in. But basically, what we're looking at here is on the timeliner tool. This is pretty empty at the moment. There's no tasks in there at the moment. But basically, you've got the initial tab here, the first tab, the tasks tab, is where you will populate your file here with your tasks, basically your construction program, with the start and end dates, etc. for each task. They will list here basically like almost what they would look like in the spreadsheet form, which we'll see shortly. But they will list here, and then you can add, you can start adding pieces of, or selecting pieces of geometry in your model, and attach them to those specific tasks, so that then you can start to build and simulate the construction of in time, basically, how this stuff gets built. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the next tab. So there's different ways that you can add those tasks, but we're going to come back and look at that in a second. Let's just keep moving through these tabs. The next tab, the data source tab here. Okay, so this in the task tab, you can add tasks manually. Okay, but you can also, instead of adding tasks manually in a Navisworks timeline file, you can actually add a link to an external database or an external construction program. In other words, a Microsoft project file or a Primavera file or a simple CSV file. Okay, and in that way you can link. You add the link here to that external file, and then you build your tasks up from that file. So you're not manually creating your tasks. So we'll have a quick look at that as well, how you actually bring in and the steps to bring in an external file and how you link it. Okay, the next tab along here is the Configure tab. So this is where once we start simulating this model being built, you can turn your different models different times. You can turn them different colors depending on what construction type or depending on task type, I should say. Task type is the terminology that it uses. Depending on what task type that geometry is assigned to. And by that I mean whether it's, as you can see here, whether it's construct or whether it's demolish or whether it's temporary. And so you can see here that the construct is set to green, demolish is red, and temporary is yellow. We'll go in a bit further later and look at how you can set up and change these settings and maybe even add some more task types. But basically, it's pretty logical how it works. So basically, if an item is being built, being constructed new, then you assign it to the construct task type construct in your tasks menu. And during the simulation, when you run the simulation, that item is going to turn green during the period that you've assigned it to be built, i.e. its start and end date. So during that time on the timeline, that's when that item will be that color, and then it'll be its ongoing color, like you see here in the model in front of us. If it was a demolish or if it was a temporary item, then you would assign it to those two task types, and they would show up in red or in yellow for that time when they're on the task line, when they're on the timeline being demolished or being made temporary. Alrighty, and then the last tab is basically once you've got a task list and you've assigned geometry and you've set it all up, this is where you can actually control and run the simulation. And you've also got settings in here, which we'll have a look at a little later. And you can also, which we'll look at the end of the program, at the end of the webinar as well. You can also export. Once you're happy with your timeline, you can actually export your animation or the video out to a AVI format file, to a video file, so that you can share it with with clients or with whoever's stakeholders, whoever's interested in looking at how this is actually going to be built, to the builders or construction managers, etc. That type of thing. All right. Okay, so let's just go back to. I'm just going to have let's have a look at how we would link some tasks in using the data link first off. So we'll have a look at that, and then we'll come back and look at how we can actually assign some tasks. Okay. So just so you know how to attach these links to an external database. So you might have for example, a Microsoft project a construction program file, or you might have a Primavera. There's a few different formats that you can import in here. So when I click on the Add button here, you can see an example of the list of programs that you can actually import into Navisworks in terms of a construction program. Okay. There are other. These are obviously, I guess, the most popular, I guess, construction programming databases, Microsoft Project, Primavera. There are. I should just note that there are other. Navisworks will read other file types, but because I don't have them loaded on my those programs, because I don't have them loaded on my machine, then they're not listing there. But it would be as simple as if you had that program loaded, or when you load a different construction programming type program onto your machine, you would then in Navisworks Navisworks assign that in there, and it will become a shortcut here on this list that you can export from, or that you can import from. Okay, so you can see there the list that you can bring in. So we're going to have a look at today. I've got a quick example of a CSV format file, and I'll just open it up here, which is opening up in Microsoft Excel. Okay, so we're just looking at it in basically in spreadsheet form. But this is just a bit of an example of a CSV file construction program that you can use to import in. Okay, so this I should just note that this has actually come from a Primavera file initially. It was then saved as simplified a bit and saved as this CSV file with basically just the columns that we want. Okay, and for purposes of obviously now importing it into Navisworks. Okay, but you can see here, you know, it's pretty straightforward, I guess. You know, you can see it's got what's called an activity ID, but then it's got obviously the activity name, so what's actually happening during that task, what's being built, or what's being demolished, or what's being constructed, and then it's got a duration column, and then it's got a start and a finish date for those items. Okay. So as I said, this file has been produced from a Primavera file. So I'll just jump back into Navisworks. So while I'd say that you can import in these files, and we certainly will look at in more depth at doing these in future webinars. But I would say that it's actually, if you can, it's actually quite, it really kind of simplifies the task if you can take those files and create a CSV file from them. It just makes life a bit easier because it's, as you will see, it's a lot easier to map it in and bring it into Navisworks. So just something to keep in mind there. Okay, so let's have a look at bringing in that CSV file. So if I click on the Add button here, I'm in the Data Source tab here. I'll click on the Add button and I'll click the CSV import. Okay, I can see that CSV file there now. Okay, so I'm going to click on Open for that, and what I then get is this field selector dialog box. Okay, so what this is actually wanting to know, Navisworks is now going to import this CSV file in, but before we do that, it wants to just know basically you need to kind of guide it a bit in what column is what, I guess. So this is, I guess, essentially this is like a mapping file. Okay, so these are the entries or the fields for within the Navisworks timeline. Okay, and these are the fields that were accessible from, or the columns, I should say, that are accessible from that CSV file. Okay, so this is where you can map and tell Navisworks, okay, for the task name in the Navisworks timeline, I want you to use that activity name column from my CSV file. Okay, for the display ID, I want Navisworks to use that activity ID column. Okay, so this pull down list here, what we're seeing here are all those columns that were, let's open up the CSV, all these columns that are available in this CSV file here. Okay, all right. So, and then for the start date and the end date, obviously I want it to point towards the start column and the finish column. These two columns here from my CSV file. Okay. All right. It's probably just quickly add there, just on that display ID. We won't go into too much sort of detail on that, but basically that's just the way that it identifies, the individual task, and it's coming from the construction program as well. So okay, so we'll click OK to that. All right. So what that's done now is that's brought in that link, and that link is now sitting here. As a link basically to tell Navisworks where to get the information from. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Okay, what you need to do now is to actually build a task, to build up some tasks from this link file to populate this list basically. What you need to do is into one more step. What we need to do is to come into the Data Sources tab, and on this link that we now have, we need to right click. We get an option here on this shortcut menu to rebuild the task hierarchy. Okay, so we click on that. just ignore, this message is just telling us that there are some missing IDs from the CSV file, so that's okay. We can click OK to this. It just means that that CSV file might not be totally complete in some parts, but it's still going to let us continue. And if I come now back to my task menu, you can see, and I'll just drag that up a bit for a minute, you can see now that our task list is starting to be populated, okay? And you can see that it's automatically put in for us the start dates and the end dates for those that were available within the CSV file. You'll see that there's an NA for any of the tasks that didn't have a date assigned to them, but for the ones that did, it basically has populated that for us. So you can see that this can be quite handy. You can use this link and you can continue to update this this file externally from Navisworks. You can, if the construction program changes, you can update this file, and then you come back into your link and you synchronize, and then you rebuild the task hierarchy, which will then repopulate this with the any updates that have been made to the construction program. Okay. Okay, so that's the steps for bringing in and assigning a data link, an external data link, and then adding those tasks to the timeline. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to just switch files here for a minute, because I want to now take you through how you actually build these tasks and how you actually assign the geometry. Okay. So let's go here, and I'm going to open up this file here. Just drag that down so we can see a bit more in the window. Okay, so you can see this is the same file, but you might have noticed I've actually got what's called selection sets. I've saved some selection sets in this model now in Navisworks. So if I click on these, you can see, for example, I click on the slab, you can see that that's the slab that I've created in this selection set. Some of these underground, in-ground items, like the foundations and some of the steelwork and whatnot, I've created those selection sets as well. Okay, so this is important because I'm going to show you how you can actually use selection sets in Navisworks to actually set up the tasks in your timeline. Okay, and this is quite an effective way of doing it if you do have to add tasks manually. Okay, instead of having to add a task, you can obviously here add a task one at a time. Give it a name and give it a start date, and just do this totally manually, but I would suggest that's going to obviously take quite a while, and you don't want to be sitting there all day manually filling out this line. So this is just a way, if you don't have an external program, maybe you're just setting up an example of a timeline for a project that you have, then this is a really, really quick way that you can actually set up your task by using this selection set. So hopefully you guys are familiar enough with Navisworks to know how to create those selection sets. Basically, you can select, I can click and select a whole bunch of items in my model. And once they're all highlighted, I can come up to the Save Selection button on my Home tab of the ribbon. I can click Save Selection, and it'll save me a new selection set, which will be what I've actually currently got selected. Okay, and then you can obviously give it a name as you wish. So that's basically what I've done for all of these that you see already existing here. I've gone through and I've selected those items and assigned them to these different sets. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that one. We don't need that one I just created. That's how I've created these ones. Okay, I've gone through and just really basically selected just the core makeup, the core elements, I guess, of this model that we're looking at, and just assigned each element to different selection sets. And I've named them and ordered them here, basically in the order that I would want the timeline to go, from sort of the ground up, I guess, and the foundations up. And you'll see how this can be now quite handy. Okay. All right. All right. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can use these selection sets now to populate our task window. All right. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. All you need to do is, obviously, as I said, there's different ways that you can add tasks to this timeline. You can add them manually, one at a time, or you can click on this auto add task, and there's a few options in here. Okay. The bottom one on this pull-down menu for every set is the one we're going to look at today. Okay. So this is going to give us a task for every selection set that we have named in our model. Okay. So if I click on that, okay, we should see that it is actually assigned, created, I should say, a task for each of those sets. So it's named them obviously the same as what the selection sets are named, and it's created a task for each of them. And what it has done for us as well, you'll see over here in the attached column, you can see that it's actually telling us that yes, there is actually geometry attached to these tasks, and that geometry is in fact the geometry that is actually assigned in those selection sets. Okay, so you're kind of doing two steps at once here when you do it this way. You don't have to then manually you don't have to manually create these tasks and then manually go and actually select elements and attach that geometry. Okay. So if you were doing it that way, if you were doing it totally manually, then that's what you would do. Okay, you would add your tasks. If I just added one at the bottom here, for example, I'll click Add Task. I've got this new task here. Then what I can do is I can then start to select geometry in my model, and whilst I've got it selected, I can come back down to the task window here, and I can right-click on my task, and I can say Attach Current Selection. Okay. So what that will do is attach, if I say that, it's actually telling us that we've got an explicit selection that is actually attached now to that task, that explicit selection being this slab that I've just selected within the model. Okay, so that's how you would do it manually if you weren't doing it this way with the selection sets. That's how you could do, add additional tasks if you want to into your model and just add geometry on the fly. Okay. There's other options in there also that you can actually, you can still use any sets that exist in your file. You can actually right-click on a task and attach a set to that task. Okay, so you can also do it that way. All right. So I'm just going to delete that row there now because we don't want that in here. It's going to mess up our. Okay. All right. So we've got the beginnings of our timeline here. Okay, so it's created the tasks for us as per our selection sets. It's automatically attached those selection sets, or the geometry within those selection sets. It's attached them to these tasks. Okay, and it's also just given us some example start date and end date. Okay, now you can see that this goes, which is important. It actually goes sequential through the list, so you can see that it's going sort of day by day almost. So you can, at any time, you can come in here and manually manually update these fields at any time. So I could change any of these dates if I wanted to. I can also even rename the tasks if I want, but I'm not going to do that at this stage. But just so that you know, you can actually come in here and manually update these fields. Yeah, it's probably a good thing to note there as well, just with updating the fields here. If you were using it, if you were doing this in the way that we showed at the beginning by attaching a link to an external database, once you've built the task hierarchy from that link, from that external file, you can actually still go in and manually change the dates in there. But just keep in mind that if you do that, and then you later on bring in a new link or update that link, and then you rebuild it, anything that you've manually overridden will be overridden by what you've got in the linked file. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that any manual updates you make whilst you've got a data link in there will potentially be overridden at some stage when that gets rebuilt from that link. Okay, so if you're doing it in that way, using an external link, it's a good idea to never update it in this window, never update it manually. Always make your changes back in your source file, back in your CSV file, or back in your construction program file. Then relink it back in and rebuild the task list from there. Okay. got all the geometry assigned, okay, and we've got some good dates that sort of make sense, that a sequential order of dates and days when this stuff's being built, basically from the ground up, okay. So it's starting to look pretty good. So let's go and have a look now at we'll quickly simulate this now and just show what this is actually doing by attaching that geometry, okay. And then we'll come back and have a look at some of the settings that we can actually manipulate and change to get it look maybe a bit more what we want, okay. So I come and click on the Simulate tab here at the end. You can see now that it's actually active because I've got a timeline. I've actually got tasks, okay. And you can see that it's starting from the 20th of the 1st, which is actually, if I go back to the task, you see that that's the first date for our first items being constructed, okay. So that's why everything else is hidden at the moment, because they're being built in future dates, as you can see here from the list, okay. So the start date is on the 20th of January, okay, which is obviously today. This start date is showing only basically those first foundations of footing that we can see there on the screen, okay. So what we can do now is basically we can run this simulation and just see what it's starting to look like, okay. So if you've got your control buttons here on the left here, basically play, pause, okay. So let's just click play and have a quick look at how this is looking. So you can see that it's actually being built in all of the, as the timeline moves forward, the items that are being constructed turn green, and then once they've been constructed, once that date passes on the timeline, they then exist basically, so they go to the colours that they are in the model, all right? Okay, so that was fairly quick. We've run through that and it's shown us that it's working quite well. Okay, so let's just go back and have a look at how we can actually change some of the settings now. Start getting it to look a bit more maybe what you want to look like. Okay. Just quickly in here in the settings, if you click on the settings button here in the Simulate tab, you can actually manipulate when the storyboard actually starts, when the timeline actually starts. So you can basically by default it'll start on the first date that exists in your timeline. So your very first task, whatever that first date is, whatever the time is, that's where it'll default and start to. So that's why, if I just cancel that, that's why when I go back to the start here, that's why we're starting on that date. We can already see this stuff being built. Okay. But if you wanted it maybe to start it maybe a day before or a little bit before, so you don't see anything, or you might have another file where you've got site works going on before any buildings get constructed. In this settings dialog box, you can actually override those settings and override those start dates and actually tell it to start the day before or whenever you want. Okay, and you can also update or override the end date as well, so you can go a little bit past the default, which will be the last day on your timeline, basically. Okay. All right. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, so that's running. Okay. All right. So let's have a look at. We'll come back in here and we'll have a look at the Configure tab now. Okay. So this Configure tab, you saw how, so let's go to the simulate, how the items that are being constructed are turning green while they're being constructed during the date and time that they're being constructed. Okay. In the Configure tab, this is where you can actually set up those colorings. Okay, as per what you want. Okay. So at the moment we have three task types. Okay, construct, demolish, and temporary. If you come into the appearance definitions here over on the right, click on that button. This is where you can actually assign those colors and actually change the things like the transparency, etc. Okay, so what we might want to do is maybe make it even a bit darker colors. What's happening? Okay, so I can see that my construct task type is assigned to the green 90% transparent appearance. So if I come into the window here and I can see, okay, that's the green 90% transparent appearance. So I can see at the moment it's on a 39%. It's actually on a 39% transparency. Okay. So it was originally up there, say 90, but it's really quite light. Okay, so you can actually, I've actually moved these to actually make them a bit darker. You could make them, not transparent at all, or you could make them, you can change the transparency there. Okay. Obviously, if you change that and you were naming this like it is here by what the transparency is, then you want to change that to be updated to reflect what the transparency is, whether it's 50%, whether it's 90%, whether it's not transparent at all. Okay, but just so you know, that's where you can actually change those colours. So if they're not showing up, if they're showing up too light during your simulation, then you can come in here and up the colours, change the transparency. Okay. Okay, so we'll click OK to that. Okay, and just further, just on these task types, because I don't think I covered this before. Basically, where you assign those task types, if you come back into your task tab here in the tasks list, you'll notice that there's a column here called task type. Okay, so this is where you actually assign that specific task. This is where you assign what type it actually is. Okay, so you'll notice if I click in there, you'll get a little pull-down menu for this highlighted row, highlighted task, and that pull-down menu is basically the available task types that we were just looking at in the configure tab. Okay, we've got construct, demolish, and temporary. Okay, so just a bit of an explanation, I guess, of what they are, in case you're wondering, or where you might use them. Obviously, if for a simple demonstration like this, basically we're building up the model, and it's all been constructed. It's all basically new construction. Okay, we don't have any demolition works here, or we don't have any temporary works. But just to show you how, just an example how that might work, maybe I'll put the slab, say for example, as temporary, and then I might maybe put some of these walls as demolished. Okay, so I'll go back to my simulate. If I run that simulation again, you should see that some of this stuff, like the slab, should be yellow now as it goes, as it comes in. You see that, and those walls are red as they come in. Okay, I'll click on pause and then I'll just bring it back to the start again for a sec. Obviously that it was pretty quick for the slab there, but where you might have things like temporary, you might have in your model, you might be building or modelling, I should say, you might be modelling your temporary hoarding or temporary fencing around your model. So you could assign temporary to those. You could add them to the timeline and assign temporary as your task type for those. And what you can then do is you could change the date. So just if, for example, we had a temporary fence or hoarding in here, which was, for example, this slab, we could change the date and make it, instead of it disappearing on the same day, maybe that temporary fencing or hoarding, is there existent during the construction, pretty much for the life of the construction. So you could come in here and you could change the end date to be something a bit more. And if I just quickly show you that, so I'll just change it to maybe the 3rd of February. Okay, if I now come back to my simulate, we should see that, if I just play that, okay, so you can see how while this keeps getting built, this temporary item, which I assigned that slab, stayed there basically for a bit longer, until the timeline came past the 3rd of February, then it switched itself off. Okay, so that's how you can actually start to assign those different task types, and you can actually not only see new construction in your timeline, but you can start to see some of the temporary work that you might add to it, and you can start to see some of the demolished bits that might even be happening before you construct stuff. Okay, so it can be quite useful. You can probably start to see that this can be quite useful for large projects where you've got sites where you need to manage site access, when certain things are coming up, when things are down, where temporary hoarding or temporary fences that might block access here and there, where they're going to be at what time during the build. And then that can also help for your site management, basically, and lay down areas where you can actually areas where you might be able to put materials before they're being used, areas where they might be able to be stored, and also to access, like for construction equipment and for things like cranes and excavators and things like that. How you could actually get them through. You can even add them as models into the actual file, put them as a task on the timeliner, and actually have them in there so that you can see them being accessed and going through the site. Okay. All right. So I'll take that. I'm going to take that back to the 27th of Jan. Okay. And the same there goes for, and I'll put that back to construct. And the same there goes for demolish as well. Okay. So you can assign, as I said, the task type of demolish to any task, and you could manipulate the dates and change those dates. So you can see there, really simply here, you can see how easy it is to actually build up this timeline, and how you can manipulate the dates and start making things change when you want them to. Okay. All right. The last thing to show here, or actually one thing I should note, well, if I click on play again, note that you can actually, while it's run, I can actually rotate the model around. Okay. And see it being built at different angles while it's going. Okay, so that can be pretty handy. The reason we're not seeing those walls is because I haven't changed it from demolish back to construct. I'll put that back to construct. We'll see if the walls are back there now. Okay, so that can be quite handy, being able to rotate that around while it's going. So if you were showing people this on the screen on the fly, then obviously you can be spinning that around and having a look at how it works. Important note though that when you export to a video file, like when you're ready to export this as an animation to an AVI file, a video file format, sometimes it's better to just leave the orientation of the model in one spot, because if you're moving it around a bit, it can become quite confusing, obviously. So it's just something to keep in mind there. But let's just have a quick look at that. So before we look at the export settings, something that's important that will lead on to that is just back in the settings here. Obviously, just keep in mind that you've got other settings in here that affect or change the pace of how this is running. So the mine's running quite quickly at the moment. You've got different options here for your interval sizes, whether it's based on percentage of the actual entire timeline, or whether it's based on weeks or days or hours. Like for example, leave it on percent and maybe change it back to 5. Hope we can see a bit of a change if I say OK to that. So it's just a little bit slower, as you can see. But anyway, those settings are in there. You can have a play around with those, and you can see how you can change the rate at which it's moving, if you want to slow it down or speed it up. Okay. All right. I'll say OK to that. So then, once you're happy with your timeline and you're ready to go, basically you can click on the little export button here on the right. Okay, and this will open you up the animation export dialog box. Okay, so this dialog box is basically all the settings that you want to export it to and what file format you want to export it to. Okay, so you can export actually a video file if you want, so an AVI file, or you can export a image by image representation of your timeline. So you can export it out into an image for each step, basically. Okay. If you want to show it maybe in a presentation or in a report, or as a PDF format. Okay. So if I cancel that and change that to AVI, just in there you've got further options in here of what codecs you want to use, things like that. Okay. And then very bottom of the screen is to do with the frame rates, frames per second. That will also affect the speed of your video file. And also the size, of your file, what you want it to be, width and height, basically. Okay. cancel that, and then you basically just save it to the AVI file, and it'll run through, and depending on the size and the length of it, is obviously going to depend on the size of your AVI file. But they can obviously get quite large, those video files, just something to keep that in mind. One last thing that I'll just show you here, you might have noticed, if I just cancel that, you might have noticed when I run the simulation, you might notice up here on the top left of the screen that it's actually reporting to us the actual date and the day as the video is running, so you can kind of get a bit of a reference to what the date is. That can be quite handy. Just to show you where you access that from, that's basically, again, in this settings button dialog here. This overlay text here, if I edit that, that's basically where it's getting those date and time. So you click on any other extras like cost or anything else that you have in there. So you basically click on these buttons to add it, and it'll add it as these sort of type codes. But that's basically how you're getting that up there on the screen. Okay. All right. That just about takes us to the end of the webinar today. The basic run through the timeline there. I hope that's been helpful. Hopefully you've been able to get a bit out of that and be able to take it back to your projects and start to set up a timeline of your own project and start to use some of those settings in there. This was Navisworks 2014 Manage that we're looking at here. If you have an older version of Navisworks, say 2012 or 2011, maybe a couple of years back, some of these tools or some of these names, these tabs might look a little bit different, but basically the settings and whatnot work the same. They're very similar. There just might be a few differences, and obviously with 2014 there's a few new features. So there's a few other extra ways that you can attach tasks and ways that you can and access to external links as well. There's a bit more extra that you couldn't link in past versions of Navisworks. Okay, so but otherwise it'll pretty much look the same, and you should be able to find a way around. One tip I guess would be always right click here in the window. If you're looking for a certain tool or to be able to do something, right click in the windows here, and you obviously get you always get a shortcut menu which houses basically all of the certain tools or certain things you can run on that certain item. Okay, so you might find what you're looking for in there if you get a bit lost and you can't find what you're doing. All right, so hopefully you can take that away and apply this to your own projects. All right. I'm just going to have a quick look. It doesn't look like there's been any further questions through the taskbar there while we're going. So with that, then I think I'll end the webinar here. I'll just lastly finish off by just informing you guys that that you've got some up and coming webinars for A2K. If I can get to that right slide. So there's some ones coming up this month if you're interested. One on Inventor on the 22nd of January. There's an e-training for education webinar coming up on the 23rd of January. And there's also, this is going to be a really interesting one actually, this people simulation, an extra dimension in the BIM process. That's coming up on the 28th of January. That should be quite interesting. That's to do with simulating movement of people and traffic and things like that. If you're interested in that type of thing, I suggest you try and get on board for that one. So if you're interested in any of these webinars, you can register for them online on our website, A2KTechnologies.com.au. Okay. All right. So that's it. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks for watching. And yeah, I hope you can start and go and try some of those tools out yourself and have some success with it. All right. Thanks very much for watching. See you later.